The testing chamber hummed with anticipation as I, Research Director Vexathalan of the Galactic Military Academy, reviewed the human's application file for the 9th time that morning. Her name was Kira Vaughn, and according to the preliminary psychological assessment, she possessed what my colleagues politely termed as concerning levels of confidence. I should have recognized that as the understatement of my career. "Director, the subject has arrived," my assistant Plix announced through the comm unit. His voice carried that peculiar tremor it always did when humans were involved. Couldn't blame him, really. 3 cycles ago, a human cadet had accidentally demolished our zero-gravity combat simulator by, and I quote, "just trying to see if the safety rails were load-bearing." They weren't. Not anymore. "Send her in," I replied, straightening the data pads on my desk. Professional appearance mattered, even when you were about to witness what would likely be another fascinating example of human recklessness masquerading as capability. The door slid open, and Kira Vaughn walked into my office with the kind of casual stride that suggested she either didn't understand the gravity of academy entrance examinations or, more disturbingly, didn't care. She stood perhaps 1.7 meters tall, average for her species, with dark hair pulled back in what humans called a ponytail, and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of the room in seconds. "Director Vexathalan?" she asked, extending her hand in that bizarre human greeting ritual. "I'm ready for the assessment." I regarded her outstretched appendage for a moment before remembering the cultural briefing. Right. Physical contact is greeting. How wonderfully unhygienic. Nevertheless, I gripped her hand briefly, noting the surprising firmness of her grasp. "Ms. Vaughn," I began, settling back into my chair. "Before we proceed to the physical examinations, I must ask, do you understand what you're attempting to undertake? The Galactic Military Academy has trained officers from 473 species over the past millennium. Our standards are, shall we say, rigorous." She smiled. Actually smiled. As though I'd told her we were serving her favorite beverage, instead of informing her that 92% of applicants failed within the first assessment phase. "I've read the literature," she said simply. "When do we start?" Oh, this was going to be entertaining in the way supernovas are technically entertaining. Briefly spectacular, ultimately catastrophic. "Very well. Follow me." I led her through the Academy's main corridor, past the Hall of Champions where holographic statues of our most distinguished graduates stood in eternal vigilance. Kira's gaze lingered on each one, but she made no comment. Good. Perhaps she possessed some appropriate level of intimidation after all. We arrived at Assessment Chamber 1, where Junior Technician Ralnex waited beside our standard physical evaluation equipment. The poor fellow's antennae wilted slightly at the sight of the human, a reaction I was beginning to recognize as universal among my staff. "We'll begin with baseline measurements," I explained, gesturing to the various machines. "Grip strength, cardiovascular capacity, neural response time, skeletal density analysis, that sort of thing. Standard procedure, nothing too demanding." "Sounds reasonable," Kira said, rolling her shoulders in a loose, ready motion that made me vaguely nervous. Ralnex guided her to the grip strength apparatus, a device designed to measure force output across species with wildly varying physiologies. The current record holder was a Craxian named Thulmor, whose crushing power had registered at 3,200 units. Perfectly respectable for a species evolved from ambush predators on a high-gravity world. "Simply grasp the handles and squeeze," Ralnex instructed, his voice barely above a whisper. "The machine will automatically calibrate to your body mass and—" The equipment made a sound I'd never heard before, a grinding, protesting shriek of metal under stress, followed by a series of sharp pops that reminded me unpleasantly of small arms fire. The display panel flickered, showed a number climbing rapidly past 4,000, then simply went dark. Smoke began drifting from the apparatus. Said Ralnex eloquently. Kira released the handles and examined her palms. Was it supposed to do that? No, I managed, staring at the ruined equipment. No, it absolutely was not. That machine has been in service for 23 cycles. It's tested everyone from Durelian heavy worlders to Zenthari combat specialists. It has never, in its entire operational history, malfunctioned. First time for everything? Kira offered with a shrug that was entirely too casual for someone who'd just destroyed a piece of equipment worth more than a small spacecraft. I took a steadying breath, the kind that required 3 of my 4 lung chambers to fully execute. Let's, move on to the cardiovascular assessment. Ralnex, please make a note that the grip apparatus requires immediate maintenance. The technician nodded mutely, his complexion having shifted to a concerning shade of pale violet. The cardiovascular machine, at least, was more robust. A simple treadmill design with monitoring equipment that tracked heart rate, oxygen consumption, and metabolic efficiency. I'd seen Karathi endurance runners complete the standard protocol while barely registering elevated respiration. Kira stepped onto the platform, and we began at what the machine designated as Level 1. A gentle incline, modest speed, nothing challenging for any species with ambulatory capacity. We'll gradually increase difficulty, I explained. The test concludes when you signal inability to continue, or when your vital signs indicate dangerous stress levels. Please don't attempt to push beyond your limitations. We've had incidents with overly ambitious candidates. She nodded, already settling into an easy rhythm as the treadmill accelerated. Level 5. Her breathing remained steady, conversational even. Level 10. A light sheen of perspiration on her brow, but her pace never faltered. Level 15. This was where most candidates began showing serious fatigue. Kira adjusted her stride and kept going. Level 20. Ralnex was watching the monitor with the kind of fixed intensity usually reserved for incoming missile trajectories. Director, he said quietly, her cardiac efficiency is… This doesn't make sense. According to these readings, her heart shouldn't be working this hard, but she's not showing any signs of distress. Level 25. The treadmill was now angled at 30 degrees, moving at a pace that would challenge even cybernetically enhanced soldiers. Kira's breathing had deepened, certainly, but she was maintaining conversation. How much longer does this usually go? She asked between measured breaths. Not this long, I admitted. You've already exceeded the 98th percentile for endurance across all tested species. Level 30. The machine began making ominous clicking sounds. Warning lights illuminated across the control panel. Ralnex? I prompted. The motor assembly is overheating, he reported, voice climbing an octave. It's not designed for continuous operation at maximum output. We need to shut down. I can keep going, Kira called out, still running. I'm sure you can, I said dryly. Unfortunately, the equipment cannot. Please step off before you reduce our second machine of the morning to expensive scrap. She complied, stepping down with barely a wobble, despite having just completed what should have been a physically impossible feat. The treadmill's motor made a final grinding protest before dying entirely, releasing a cloud of acrid smoke that triggered the chamber's fire suppression system. We stood there, dripping with flame-retardant foam, while emergency alarms wailed overhead. I'm starting to detect a pattern, Kira observed. How incredibly perceptive of you, I replied, scraping foam from my sensory ridge. Ralnex, inform maintenance. We'll need a full equipment replacement in Chamber 1. Again. The technician fled, muttering something about career changes and agricultural work. I regarded the human with what I hoped was professional detachment, rather than the growing existential dread I actually felt. Ms. Vaughn, I'm beginning to suspect that standard testing protocols may be inadequate for human physiology. I could have told you that, she said, far too cheerfully. We kind of have a reputation. So I'm learning. I consulted my data pad, scrolling through the remaining assessment requirements. We still need to evaluate your neural response time, spatial reasoning, and combat simulation performance. However, given the morning's events, perhaps we should employ equipment that's, well, less expensive. Whatever works, Kira said. Though I should probably mention, I tend to test well. That, I reflected grimly, was becoming painfully apparent. We relocated to Assessment Chamber 7, which housed our cognitive and reaction testing suites. These were less mechanical, more digital, theoretically less vulnerable to physical destruction. I clung to that hope with all 4 of my primary gripping appendages. The neural response test was straightforward, at least in theory. A series of lights, sounds, and tactile stimuli delivered in random patterns while sensors measured the subject's reaction speed. The current record sat at 0.04 standard seconds, held by a Euryxian whose entire evolutionary history involved dodging aerial predators. Kira settled into the testing chair, while Ralnex's replacement, a nervous Plexian named Jorvik, attached the monitoring sensors to her temples. "Ready?" I asked. "Ready?" The test initiated. Lights flashed. Kira's hand moved, slapping the response pad before my own nervous system had even registered the stimulus. Again. Again. Her movements blurred, became almost precognitive in their precision. The display showed her average response time, 0.027 seconds. Jorvik made a sound like a deflating balloon. That's not possible. The sensors must be miscalibrated. "Run a diagnostic," I ordered. He did. Everything checked out perfectly. "Run it again," I said, because clearly the universe was playing an elaborate practical joke at my expense. Same results. Kira Vaughn was reacting faster than any being we'd ever tested, by a margin that suggested our previous understanding of neurological limits was, at best, incomplete. "Okay," I said slowly. Spatial reasoning next. This test involved manipulating a 3-dimensional holographic puzzle, rotating and assembling geometric shapes according to specific parameters. It was designed to evaluate abstract thinking, pattern recognition, and the kind of creative problem-solving essential for military strategy and engineering. Most species required 15 to 20 minutes to complete the standard configuration. Exceptional candidates might finish in 10. Kira studied the floating shapes for approximately 30 seconds, then began moving pieces with rapid, decisive gestures. Her hands moved through the holographic display like she was conducting a symphony, shapes clicking into place with satisfying precision. 4 minutes and 18 seconds later, she completed the puzzle. The correct puzzle. Plus 2 additional configurations we hadn't asked for. "I got bored around the 3-minute mark," she explained. "Figured I'd see if the system could handle parallel solutions. It can, by the way. Your interface design is pretty intuitive." I found myself making a notation on my datapad that simply read, "What even is this species?" "Right," I said aloud, my composure hanging by a thread. "Combat simulation. Final assessment. Then we can all go contemplate our career choices in peace." The combat simulator was our pride, our jewel, the single most advanced piece of military training technology in the Academy's arsenal. It created fully immersive tactical scenarios using hard light constructs and neural feedback, allowing candidates to face realistic combat situations without actual danger. Or at least, that was the theory. Kira examined the simulation pod with interest. "What's the scenario?" "Urban warfare," I explained. "You'll face an enemy force of 12 hostile combatants equipped with standard armaments. The objective is survival and neutralization of threats. You'll have access to a basic weapon loadout. Most candidates last approximately 8 to 12 minutes before being eliminated." "Sounds fun." She climbed into the pod without hesitation, settling into the neural interface cradle. "Let's do it." Jorvik initiated the sequence. The pod sealed shut, and external monitors displayed Kira's point of view as the simulation environment materialized around her avatar. A war-torn cityscape, smoke drifting between ruined buildings, the kind of scenario that would test tactical thinking, marksmanship, and decision-making under pressure. The hostile forces appeared, moving in coordinated patterns that had been programmed by actual military strategists. They advanced on Kira's position with professional precision. She didn't wait for them to establish positions. Instead, she moved. And by moved, I mean she exploded into action with a velocity that made the camera feeds difficult to follow. She vaulted over cover, using elevation and momentum in ways the scenario designers had never anticipated because they'd never encountered anyone with her combination of strength, speed, and apparent disregard for conventional tactics. Is she using a trash can as a thrown weapon?" Jorvik asked, his voice climbing toward panic. Indeed she was. The improvised projectile struck one hostile with enough force to register as a kill on the simulation's damage calculator. She followed through with suppressing fire, advancing while her opponents were still processing the fact that they were under attack from directions that shouldn't have been physically accessible. 6 minutes in, half the hostile force was eliminated. Kira had sustained one minor hit, barely registering on her health display. 8 minutes. 3 hostiles remaining. They'd fallen back to a defensive position, exactly as programmed. Kira breached their position by climbing the outside of a building and entering through a third-story window. A window the simulation designers had made inaccessible because no species we'd tested possessed the strength-to-weight ratio necessary to scale vertical concrete surfaces. 10 minutes, 37 seconds. Simulation complete. All hostile forces neutralized. The human emerged from cover, virtual avatar barely winded, and the pod began its shutdown sequence. Then, the alarms started. "What, now?" I demanded. Jorvik's face had gone completely pale. "The simulation computer. It's overloaded." She completed the scenario so far outside normal parameters that the tactical analysis subroutines are locked in recursive error loops, trying to catalog her performance. The whole system's crashing. Sure enough, the monitors dissolved into static, then went dark entirely. The combat simulator pod opened with a hiss of equalizing pressure, and Kira climbed out, looking slightly disappointed. "That was shorter than I expected," she said. "Any chance we could run it again with, I don't know, more enemies? Maybe give them better weapons?" I stared at her, stared at the smoking remains of what had been a functioning combat simulator, stared at the 3 destroyed pieces of equipment we'd already lost that morning, stared at the growing realization that the Galactic Military Academy's entire testing protocol was fundamentally inadequate for evaluating human capabilities. "Ms. Vaughn," I said, my voice remarkably steady considering the circumstances, "I believe we've gathered sufficient data for today's assessment." "Really? We didn't even get to the strength tests, or the endurance combat trials, or—" Sufficient data, I repeated firmly. Please report to the administration office. I suspect we'll need to develop entirely new evaluation criteria for your species. Possibly an entirely new facility. One with insurance. She grinned. That infuriatingly confident human expression I was rapidly learning to associate with impending infrastructure damage. So, does this mean I passed? I looked at the wreckage of Assessment Chamber 7. Looked at my data pad with its impossible readings. Looked at Jorvik, who appeared to be seriously reconsidering his life choices. Ms. Vaughn, I said carefully, you didn't just pass. You've systematically demolished every benchmark we use to evaluate military potential across 473 species. You've destroyed equipment worth more than my annual salary. You've given me a stress disorder I didn't know I could develop, and you did all of this before lunch. Is that a yes? Despite everything, every shred of professional dignity I'd lost that morning, every piece of expensive equipment now reduced to expensive debris, I felt something unexpected. Not quite a smile. My species didn't really do those, but the closest equivalent. Because for all the chaos, all the impossible results, and violated physical laws, I'd just witnessed something genuinely remarkable. Humans. They didn't just push limits. They broke testing equipment before it could properly record how far beyond those limits they'd gone. Report to administration, I repeated. Welcome to the Academy, Cadet Vaughn. And may whatever deities you humans believe in have mercy on my engineering staff. She saluted, a crisp, precise movement, then left with that same casual confidence she'd entered with. I stood alone in the ruined chamber, surrounded by sparking electronics and the acrid smell of overheated machinery, and began drafting my report. Subject: Human Applicant Assessment, Preliminary Results. Contents: Please increase the equipment maintenance budget. Substantially. This was going to be one very interesting academic term. 3 weeks had passed since Kira Vaughn's entrance examination had left our testing facilities looking like a war zone, and I'd foolishly believed the worst was behind us. That optimism died screaming when I received an emergency summons to the Advanced Training Complex at 0400 hours. Please tell me she didn't break the gravity chamber, I muttered, sprinting through empty corridors while my sleep-deprived brain conjured increasingly catastrophic scenarios. Please tell me she didn't somehow ignite the quantum foam in the physics lab. Please tell me. It's worse, gasped Instructor Colrex, meeting me at the entrance. Her scales had gone completely white, which in her species indicated either extreme terror or extreme confusion. Possibly both. You need to see this yourself. We hurried past security checkpoints and into Observation Bay 12, where a cluster of instructors stood frozen, staring through reinforced viewing ports into the main training arena. What I saw there made my primary brain temporarily shut down, while my secondary brain screamed warnings about impossible physics. Kira was fighting. That alone wasn't remarkable. Combat training was mandatory for all cadets. What was remarkable, what was absolutely, categorically refusing to align with any rational understanding of reality, was that she was fighting the entire advanced combat class, simultaneously. All 37 of them, including 6 Karathi heavy worlders, 4 Euryxian strike specialists, and 1 Durelian shock trooper, whose species had literally evolved from tank-sized predators. And she was winning. How long has this been going on? I demanded. 47 minutes, replied Combat Master Thexnor, his voice hollow. It started as a standard sparring rotation. She defeated her first opponent in 18 seconds. Then volunteered to face 2 opponents. Then 4. Then someone, I'm still determining who so I can have them evaluated for brain parasites, suggested she take on everyone. I watched as Kira ducked under a swing that should have taken her head off, used the attacker's momentum to flip him into two approaching opponents, then somehow launched herself horizontally across 3 meters of open space to deliver a strike that sent a Karathi twice her mass sliding across the floor. That's not possible, I stated flatly. The kinetic force required for that maneuver exceeds her body mass by orders of magnitude. Basic physics prohibits— I know, Thexanor interrupted. I've taught combat theory for 40 cycles. I understand leverage, momentum, efficient force distribution. What she's doing ignores approximately 70% of established biomechanical principles. As if to emphasize his point, Kira grabbed the arm of an attacking Eryxian, used it as an anchor point to swing herself completely around, and kicked 3 different opponents while airborne. She landed in a crouch, pivoted, and somehow ended up behind a cluster of cadets who'd been attempting to flank her. She's not even using standard combat forms, another instructor observed. That's some hybrid of at least 6 different martial disciplines, plus improvisation that shouldn't work, but somehow does. The fight concluded when the last standing opponent, a decorated Durelian veteran named Chromath, who'd survived actual warfare, slowly raised his hands in surrender. Kira accepted with a bow, not even breathing particularly hard. The arena fell silent. Then, because the universe apparently enjoyed my suffering, applause erupted. The same cadets she'd just systematically demolished were cheering. For her, the human who'd turned their advanced combat training into a demonstration of why their species' entire martial history might need revision. I need stimulants, I announced. Multiple varieties, possibly intravenously. Get in line, muttered Colrex. The observation bay door opened, and Kira entered, toweling sweat from her face. She noticed our expressions and had the audacity to look concerned. Was that not okay? Master Thexanor said I could continue as long as people wanted to keep going, and everyone seemed really enthusiastic. Enthusiastic, I repeated slowly. Cadet Vaughn, you just defeated an entire combat class, including instructors who've trained champions across half the galaxy, in less than an hour. She considered this. Should I have gone slower? I was trying to be respectful, not showboat or anything. Several instructors made choking sounds. That was you not showboating? Thexanor asked weakly. Well, yeah. I stuck to basic techniques mostly. Didn't want to make anyone feel bad. She paused, genuine confusion crossing her features. Did I mess something up? Because I can tone it down if that's better for training purposes. I closed all 4 of my eyes and counted backwards from 100. In 3 different languages. It didn't help. Cadet Vaughn, I began carefully. Has it occurred to you that your species might be, perhaps, slightly outside normal parameters for physical capability? Oh, sure, she shrugged, utterly casual about this revelation. Humans are pretty tough, I guess. Persistence hunters and all that. We evolved chasing prey until it died of exhaustion. Takes a certain kind of crazy to build a civilization around that. Persistence hunters, Colrex repeated faintly. You evolved by running prey to death. Sometimes for days, yeah. Why do you think our endurance is so good? Kira grinned. Though honestly, I'm probably not the best example of average human capability. I did compete in triathlons before joining the military, and grew up on a heavy gravity station, and maybe pushed myself a bit harder than most people during basic training. A bit harder, I said. Yeah. Than most people. Well, Another shrug. I wanted to be prepared. I looked at Thexanor. He looked at me. We shared a moment of perfect understanding that our careers had just become infinitely more complicated. "Right," I managed. "Well, since standard training protocols appear to be inadequate, we'll need to develop specialized curriculum for you. Something that actually provides appropriate challenge." "That would be great, actually," Kira said brightly. No offense to anyone, but I was getting worried the academy might be, boring. Every instructor in the observation bay made the same horrified expression. The next day, I convened an emergency meeting with the academy's senior staff. Department heads filed into the conference chamber wearing expressions ranging from exhausted resignation to morbid curiosity. Word had spread. Everyone knew about the human. "Colleagues," I began, once the room settled, "we face an unprecedented situation. In the Academy's 1,000-year history, we've never encountered a species quite like humans, specifically quite like Cadet Kira Vaughn. Is it true she arm-wrestled a Craxian and won?" asked Professor Melvix, head of xenobiology. "She actually broke the table," I confirmed. "The Craxian walked away with a sprained appendage and newfound respect for human grip strength. The table was pronounced dead at the scene." "What about the rumor regarding the zero-gravity obstacle course?" This from Commander Zixtal, our tactical operations specialist. "She completed it in record time, then asked if she could try it blindfolded, then actually did try it blindfolded and still beat the previous record." Murmurs spread through the assembly. I raised a hand for silence. Here's our problem. Our entire pedagogical framework assumes certain physical and cognitive limitations. Kira exceeds those limitations so dramatically that standard instruction is essentially useless. She's not being challenged. More concerning, she's accidentally demonstrating to other cadets that techniques we've taught for centuries might be, incomplete. "So, what do you propose?" asked Dean Thraxic, who oversaw academic standards. I activated the holodisplay, showing a complex training proposal I'd spent all night developing. Custom curriculum, individual instruction where necessary, access to advanced facilities normally reserved for graduate candidates, and, most crucially, we acknowledge that she's essentially testing the absolute limits of what our institution can provide. "That's unprecedented," Thraxic objected. "Special treatment violates our fundamental principles of equal opportunity education." "With respect, Dean, nothing about this situation is precedented." I pulled up footage of Kira's entrance exam disasters, the combat demonstration, and several other incidents from the past weeks. We're not providing special treatment. We're scrambling to provide any treatment that registers as meaningful challenge to a human operating at, and I cannot stress this enough, capabilities we didn't know were possible. The dean watched the footage, his expression slowly shifting from bureaucratic concern to genuine fascination. "Point taken. Proceed with your proposal, Director. Just try to minimize equipment damage." "I make no promises." We implemented the new protocols immediately. Kira would attend standard lectures. She needed theoretical knowledge like anyone else, but her practical training would be customized. Advanced scenarios, harder objectives, basically everything we could throw at her short of actual lethal danger. It went about as well as expected. The tactical simulation module, designed to teach strategic thinking through increasingly complex command scenarios, presented her with a theoretical planetary invasion that typically took students weeks to plan effectively. She solved it in 4 hours by identifying an exploit in the enemy's supply chain logistics that hadn't occurred to the instructors who'd designed the scenario. The engineering challenge, requiring cadets to repair a simulated damaged spacecraft using limited resources, ended with Kira not only completing the repairs, but improving the original design and creating a functioning communications array from spare parts. The survival training exercise, which dropped cadets into a hostile wilderness environment for 3 days with minimal supplies, concluded early when she not only survived but mapped the entire region, established a permanent shelter with water filtration, and rescued 2 other cadets who'd gotten lost. She built a kiln, the survival instructor reported, sounding dazed. From mud and rocks, then made pottery. Functional pottery, while completing every other objective. Who does that? Humans, apparently, I replied, adding yet another incident to my growing file labeled Why Our Testing Metrics Are Meaningless. But the real revelation came during spatial warfare training, our most demanding course, typically reserved for final-year cadets preparing for fleet command positions. I observed from the control center as Kira took her position in the command simulator. The scenario involved coordinating a small task force against superior numbers, testing ability to manage multiple variables, delegate effectively, and maintain tactical awareness under pressure. The hostile forces appeared, 3 full battle groups against her single squadron. Standard doctrine called for defensive positioning and calculated retreats. Kira immediately went on the offensive. Her squadron split into 3 elements, each executing complex maneuvers that required split-second timing and perfect coordination. She was issuing orders faster than my translator could process, managing weapon systems, communications, and strategic positioning simultaneously. How is she tracking that many variables? The course administrator whispered. We've got 17 simultaneous data streams. She can't possibly. She's not tracking them, I realized, watching her command style. She's processing them, all of them, at once. Human brains might be parallel processors rather than sequential. The battle evolved rapidly. Kira's forces hit supply lines, communication relays, command vessels, every high-value target in sequence while avoiding direct engagement with superior firepower. The enemy formation began fragmenting, losing cohesion. 15 minutes into a scenario designed to last 2 hours, the hostile forces were in full retreat. The simulator powered down. Kira removed her command headset and stretched. That was actually fun. Can we try one with worse odds? Maybe 5-1 instead of 3-1? The administrator stared at her. Cadet, that scenario has a 12% historical success rate. Most commanders who pass do so by surviving long enough to trigger the retreat protocol. You achieved total victory. Oh, she looked genuinely surprised. Is that unusual? You destroyed 3 battle groups with a squadron, he said slowly, as if explaining to a child. You did it in under 20 minutes. You're suggesting we make it harder. Well, yeah. I mean, once I saw their deployment pattern, the solution was pretty obvious. They were overextended. Communication delays between groups meant coordination was vulnerable, and their flagship kept broadcasting its position. Hit the command structure, force them to switch to local control, then exploit the confusion. Basic tactics. Basic, I repeated. You just described advanced strategic theory that we teach to senior officers. She tilted her head, considering. Huh, I guess it's just intuitive. We've got a lot of military history to draw from. Humans have been fighting wars for, our entire existence. You pick up patterns. And there it was. The real difference. Humans hadn't just evolved for physical endurance and adaptability. They'd spent their entire civilization refining the art of conflict, not because they were particularly aggressive, but because their planet had been so hostile and resources so scarce that competition was survival. We'd been training soldiers for 1,000 years. Humans had been training soldiers for 10,000 years, in environments that would kill most species we'd encountered. We weren't teaching Kira Vaughn how to be a warrior. We were watching what happened when a species that had perfected warfare through necessity encountered our relatively peaceful, institutional approach to military education. The results were humbling. Later that evening, I found Kira in the Academy's observation deck, staring out at the stars. She noticed my approach and nodded greeting. "Director Vexathalan. Something wrong?" "Just checking in," I said, joining her at the viewing port. "You've had quite an adjustment period." "It's been interesting," she smiled slightly. "Different from what I expected, honestly. Everyone's been really welcoming, even after I keep accidentally breaking things." "About that," I chose my words carefully. "Cadet Vaughn, you must understand that your capabilities are extraordinary, even by human standards based on our limited data. You're operating at levels that challenge our fundamental understanding of biological limits." She was quiet for a moment. "Is that going to be a problem? I can try to hold back more if it's causing issues." "No." The word came out more firmly than I intended. "Absolutely not. Don't diminish yourself for our convenience. Instead, help us understand. Help us build better training. Every limit you exceed teaches us something valuable about potential we didn't know existed." "Even when I destroy expensive equipment?" "Especially then." I managed something approaching humor. "Though perhaps we could aim for slightly less property damage going forward." We stood together, watching stars drift past, and I reflected on how much had changed in just a few weeks. The Academy prided itself on tradition, on centuries of established excellence. Kira Vaughn had walked in and accidentally proven that excellence was relative, that our understanding was incomplete, that there were always new heights to reach. "Director?" She broke the silence. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why did you accept my application? You must have known humans would be different. Probably difficult to train properly. Wouldn't it have been easier to reject me?" I considered the question. "Easier? Certainly. But the Academy's purpose isn't ease. It's excellence, discovery, pushing boundaries. You've done more to advance our understanding of military potential in 3 weeks than some research programs achieve in decades. Yes, you've been expensive and occasionally terrifying, but you've also been exactly what we needed, even if we didn't realize it." She grinned. "So I should keep breaking your test equipment and making instructors question their life choices?" "Within reason," I said dryly. "We do have budget constraints." We both laughed, the sound carrying through the empty observation deck. Outside, the galaxy turned, full of species and worlds and countless possibilities. Somewhere out there, more humans were probably preparing applications to the Academy. I made a mental note to increase the equipment budget, substantially, and maybe invest in stress management therapy for the staff. Because if Kira Vaughn was any indication, humanity hadn't just arrived on the galactic stage. They'd kicked down the door, broken the stage, rebuilt it better, and then asked if anyone wanted to see what else they could do. It was going to be chaos. It was going to be expensive. It was going to be absolutely magnificent. And I couldn't wait to see what happened next.